What is happening, everybody? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast, your Sunday edition. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. We have a Packer game to discuss, Packers Jets, in what I will only describe as the most nondescript Packer game of all time. I'm not going to BS you. There are very few meaningful takeaways from this game. It is probably the least meaningful preseason game even that I think I've ever watched. It's not to say that there weren't a couple noteworthy things, and we'll get to all of those in just a moment, but as you're watching a four-quarter game with an 85-man roster, 32 players did not play for the Green Bay Packers. There was a smattering of players who are going to make the team. There's less than that who are actually going to play any significant, downs for Green Bay this, at least to open the season. You never know what's going to happen with injuries, but not a ton of takeaways that are actually going to be meaningful as this actual regular season progresses. But definitely some things that I think were still positives, definitely some negatives. So let's jump in and get to them right away. I think of all of those things, and again, I guess I should start off by saying here the Packers lost 23-14. Maybe the only noteworthy aspect of that is that this was only the second time Matt LaFleur has lost back-to-back games in his coaching career, the other time in his very first preseason as head coach of the Packers. So I think that's the only thing there. Of course, the score, the box score, the stat, like none of it remotely matters. So let's get that out of the way first and just state the obvious. Yes, they lost 23-14. It doesn't matter one iota, but I do think, again, let's get to some of those positive takeaways. I think the first one is the play of the offensive line. And while we know that there's no David Bakhtiari, we know that there's no Elton Jenkins, we know that there's no Billy Turner, I think this was still an important game, especially for those players who are potentially fighting for those starting guard spots and just the overall depth of this offensive line. I think it goes without saying that you wanted to see a little bit more out of the Josh Myers, Royce Newman, Ben Braden, Lucas Patrick, John Runyon Jr., Yosh Nijman, those type of players you wanted to see a little bit more out of, because frankly, against the Texans, that group did not play well at all. They pass protected okay at times, but the run blocking was brutal. Against the Jets, a much more well-rounded performance, a much better performance. We saw the running game get more on track, only one sack against Kirk Benkert. So I thought overall the offensive line played much, much better. And frankly, that's the one group that you really wanted to see play well, because there will be starters in this game that are going to be obviously starting for the Packers this season, including Josh Myers at center and two of those guards in all likelihood to start the season until David Bakhtiari comes back. So of anything that you wanted to see from this game, you wanted to see some improvement from the offensive line, and we absolutely got that. I thought the protection was better. I thought the running lanes were much wider, and I thought overall the group did a good job. And I really want to highlight Royce Newman here, because it's such an interesting dynamic in the fact that just last week, as we went into that Texans game, it was a three-man race for those two guard spots. It was Lucas Patrick, John Runyon Jr., and Ben Braden. Royce Newman was not in that discussion, which was slightly surprising because Newman was getting reps with the one at left guard, and right tackle in OTAs and mini camps. But training camp starts, preseason game one starts, and Royce Newman was not to be heard of whatsoever. However, go back a week ago, Royce Newman outperformed all three of those players that were in the conversation originally. That trio did not play well last week. Royce Newman gets his opportunity in practice this week, practices with the ones all week, gets the start, and in my opinion, at first watch, I haven't had a chance to rewatch the game and go through the tape in more detail, but I was the two guys I was watching really close to start the game were Eric Stokes and Royce Newman. Really wanted to see how they responded and played in this game, and I was watching Royce Newman closely. I thought he played well, had a couple really nice seal blocks, had a pancake block, certainly some things to improve upon. Interesting, sort of the back-to-back plays where Kirk Benkert was tripped up under center. Both of those plays, it looked like Royce Newman was maybe involved in that. It sounded like Benkert was a little bit more of maybe Newman wasn't aligned correctly. It sounded like Matt LaFleur was more, we expect more out of the quarterback in those situations. But either way, I thought for Royce Newman's first start and to just kind of see how he would respond to everything, I thought that was a really nice performance and something he can absolutely build off of. So really, again, the biggest thing I wanted to watch in this game was O-line. It was improved, and I thought Royce Newman was a big part of that. let's talk about Kurt Benkert next, because I think overall this goes down as a positive for Kurt Benkert, right? We saw the interception, we saw some incompletions, we saw some of the miscues at the line of scrimmage, some of those sort of things. But I think Kurt deserves a ton of credit for just kind of keeping this offense moving throughout the game. Now, was it always pretty? Of course not. Was it aesthetically pleasing? Of course not. But with a group of wide receivers, he's only got 4 weapons. It's led by Malik Taylor and Amari Rodgers, who's a rookie. You've got a receiver in there that was literally just signed 2 days ago. Jay Sternberger's his best tight end. You've got a makeshift offensive line. Just not a ton to work with. He mentioned after the game that there were times that he would have liked to check out of plays, but he just wasn't sure that everyone on the field knew what all of those checks were. Like, you're not exactly dealing with a full deck at that point. And I thought for what he had at his disposal, I thought he made the most of that opportunity. Now, again, perfect, no. Is it anything that's going to elevate Kurt Benkert to anything other than a number 3 quarterback right now? No. But I think it helps him, really be on track for a practice squad spot with the Packers this season. I know there was some that maybe thought that he played well enough to get into the discussion for the number 2, or that he might get claimed by another team. Frankly, I don't see that. I think we saw some of the overall limitations in Kurt Benkert's game in this game show up a little bit later. I'm not going to nitpick this, right? Because again, I think overall this was a very, big net positive for Benkert and how he played. And he reminded me at times of a younger Jeff Garcia. I might be aging myself a little bit there, but former 49ers quarterback who also kind of came out of nowhere and had a really nice career. And he reminds me a little of that. Is he going to have the high-level arm talent? No. But he has some mobility. He can throw on the run. Just kind of that gamer mentality. If Kurt Benkert's ever your starter, you're probably in a pretty bad spot. But if he can develop over time and kind of go and use some of those strengths that he has, maybe minimize some of the weaknesses, yeah, I think there's some potential there for maybe a long-time journeyman type quarterback. And if you're Kurt Benkert, that's all you're kind of hoping for right now. And he kind of made mention of that. He knows his role. He knows he's the number 3 quarterback. And again, I think this was a net positive for him. But I wouldn't go too much further than that. And certainly still some work for Kurt Benkert to do, even to just kind of solidify his spot as a developmental guy in the practice squad moving forward. Kylan Hill, another player that was impressive. If you look at his overall stat line, 9 touches for 40 yards. Nothing that dynamic, right? I think on the kick returns didn't have a ton to work with, but we saw in a couple runs, right? The touchdown run, and then on the run where it was called back from the Lucas Patrick holding call, we saw just how dynamic he can be. He can get to that second level. He can make people miss. He's patient in the hole. He can cut on a dime. He's got that fluid running style. We saw all of that in those couple runs. And I think, I was happy to see that. We saw it on the screen pass a week ago. Again, he scored the first touchdown in both games in back-to-back weeks. But I think fans are now getting an opportunity, for those who haven't been at training camp, to see what we've been seeing from Kylan Hill all training camp long. He's solidified his name as the number 3 running back, and I thought that was another nice performance, even in somewhat limited action. And even though there wasn't always gaping holes for him, I thought he ran well and, again, showed off what he's capable of moving forward. I thought it was a great opportunity for Eric Stokes to get matched up on Corey Davis early in the game. Early in the game, 3rd down, Davis gets the best of Stokes on a double move, cuts out. Matt LaFleur did a great job of explaining postgame of how this was a play that the Jets ran against Stokes in practice. They did a quick out. Stokes jumped that. They kind of used that momentum against him, and Davis cuts back inside. It's like a 24-yard pickup. Nice throw by Zach Wilson. Nice read by Zach Wilson. But Stokes definitely burned on that play. One of the biggest things you want to see from a rookie cornerback, a young cornerback, really any cornerback, is a short memory. And I thought him coming back on 3rd down later in that drive, one-on-one with Corey Davis. Corey Davis does the quick, dig route, quick comeback route, and Stokes is all over it, bats away the pass, forces a field goal attempt by the Jets. So, yeah, he gave up the big play, but came back, got the defense off the field, forced a field goal, and that's exactly what you want to see. Of course, you would love to see him not maybe bite on the first move of the double move earlier in the drive to set up a big play, but you want to see him come back and improve upon it and still play with confidence, and that's exactly what he did. And I think overall, that experience for Stokes is going to be a net positive for him. Malik Taylor, interesting game for him. I think overall these last 2 weeks have been a really a really strong step in the right direction for Malik Taylor. 4 catches, 66 yards this week. He had the really nice back shoulder. He had the tough catch where Benkert rolled out and they initially called it incomplete, saying he bobbled, but he held onto the ball, got both feet in. I think we're just seeing him develop as a receiver. And I think overall, you're seeing him be able to make plays when called upon, other than, unfortunately for him, a big drop on one play where he should have caught it. But, outside of that one drop, I think these last 2 weeks, he shows that he has something to offer as a receiver. Now, is he super dynamic? No. But, again, as your sixth receiver, your job description is to be at least serviceable as a receiver, but also pitching on special teams. We know he's going to be the best special teams player out of Funchess and EQ, Juwan Winfrey, those type of players. So that gives him a huge leg up. And if he shows competence at receiver, it just goes a really long way into solidifying that number 6 wide receiver spot. And I think for the most part, that's what Malik Taylor has done these last couple weeks. Certainly, I don't think job earned yet, but I think it's trending in that direction right now. There's another positive performance from him. Patrick Taylor, the tough thing for Taylor, 9 rushes, 55 yards, or 9 touches, 55 yards. And I thought he actually ran well. A couple really nice cutbacks. He showed good patience at time, good vision, but a really big fumble, to start the second half, just kind of got the second half off on a really bad mark. And those are the sort of things that can't happen, right? There's no quicker exit off the 53-man roster conversation than turnovers. That was a bad turnover for Patrick Taylor. So something he can learn from. I thought he ran well outside of that, but that can't happen, and that's definitely going to be one of those things that can be a differentiator as you're looking at who potentially makes this roster. I think Taylor is a much better bet, and I think he makes the practice squad at this point, but I think there was a moment there where maybe there was some question as to whether or not the Packers would keep 4 running backs and Patrick Taylor being that 4th guy. I think the more you look at it, I think this is a 3-man crew with Kylan Hill being the 3rd, and I think Patrick Taylor ends up on the practice squad. Speaking of running backs, I thought this was a nice performance from A.J. Dillon as well. Only played a handful of plays, early in the game, but 6 total touches, 40 yards. I thought he looked like the A.J. Dillon we saw against the Titans. Ran hard, running over players, good agility, good power. He looked like A.J. Dillon, right? And I think he showed that he's ready to be the number 2. I'd be surprised if we saw him in week 3 of preseason. Maybe he gets a couple plays here and there again as well. But for the most part, my guess is this is going to do it for A.J. Dillon this preseason. And I think that's probably a pretty decent note to go out on. So one, kind of bad note here, special teams, there was the big kick return, but J.K. Scott, the 21-yard punt, this has just been classic J.K. Scott, right? He had a really great punt. The punt before that was like a 4-7 hang time down in the red zone. Like just a great punt. And he had a little swagger after the play, was doing the, Pat McAfee, just excited after the play, right? He comes back and shanks the next one 21 yards. And that's the J.K. Scott experience. And that can't happen. Like you're in your 4th year now. You were a draft pick. You have the ability to be a good punter, and you're shanking stuff. And it's just been the same old inconsistent J.K. Scott. And at this point, I think there's a really strong chance that the Packers opening week punter isn't on the roster right now. And they'll be very active in looking at the waiver wire for punters. And I think this performance hurt J.K. Scott just because this is what we've seen for 3 years now. You're hoping maybe he'd get over that. It wasn't the case. It's just an awful punt from him. On the plus side for special teams, Christian Uphoff had 2 really nice plays as a gunner down on punt team. Once splitting a double team, getting down there, forcing a fair catch. The other time, 2 players, he's super aggressive with them. He's pushing them off to the side, just a really fun play. He gets knocked down, gets back up, makes the tackle. I thought he had a really nice day as a gunner. I think he's probably a practice squad guy as well, but his special teams prowess and just his talent, he's a unique talent. That safety position is really unique. I think Henry Black has a spot wrapped up. We don't know where Vernon Scott is with his injury. Will Redmond goes out with an injury in this game. He's been banged up and his spot's in jeopardy. And then you've got 2 really interesting undrafted guys in Christian Uphoff and Ennis Gaines, who I think they would love probably to spend a season on the practice squad. I don't think either guy is getting claimed, but I think they probably like both of those guys, and they could have some tough decisions to make there. Lastly, speaking of injuries, Will Redmond went out early, kind of limped off, did not return to the game. TJ Slayton went off with what looked like an arm injury at one point, came back a handful of plays later and continued to play in the game. And then Ben Braden was down after a play, came out in the very next offensive play after a series from the Jets. Braden was right back out there. So doesn't seem like Green Bay suffered any major injuries. Will Redmond will be the one to kind of keep an eye on, but for the most part, it looked like they got out of that game injury free, which of all the things you could take away from a game is probably the best and most important when it comes to a preseason game where almost half of your team is out for one reason or another. So that's going to do it for me today. Thank you as always for joining me. Greatly appreciate it. I'll be right back here tomorrow, so make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.